Who wants to be a trillionaire? Will Zimbabwe's new money be worth more than the paper it's printed on? Cutting its losses, Vodacom closes its electronic wallet service in South Africa. And Cameroon puts quality over quantity as it targets becoming West Africa's key coffee producer. Hello and welcome to Business Africa. I'm Tukumbo Salako. Since sustained hyperinflation sent Zimbabwe's currency soaring into the stratosphere, the country's never really got to grips with its cash crisis. The country's inflation rate rose so dramatically in 2009 that paper money became practically worthless. At one stage, a $100 trillion note could only buy a few basic groceries. Since then, it's used a variety of foreign currencies, but now a shortage of cash has forced Zimbabwe to take another drastic measure. The Central Reserve Bank Governor, John Mangudia, says Zimbabwe will print its own version of the US dollar. The new Zimbabwe bond notes are not meant to replace but be traded alongside other currencies. But critics fear the worst, as Claire Muthinji and Ruth Letitia Lago report.
Zimbabweans have been queuing at various cash machines in the country after the government announced it will print its own version of the US dollar to alleviate shortage of foreign exchange. Since the fall of the Zimbabwe dollar in 2009, banks were only allowed to deal in US dollars. Given the lack of currency in banks, the governor of Zimbabwe's Reserve Bank introduced earlier this month the idea of a currency obligation.
The purpose of bond coins was to deal with the change problem. The purpose of bond notes is to deal with an incentive for exporters. But I think people are now confusing that the bond notes are coming here to cater for cash shortages. No, there's no relationship. This is an export incentive scheme.
The notes, expected in 2 months, will be backed by a $200 million bond from the Africa Export and Import Bank and will be at par with the dollar. To try calm jitters that more money would be printed than is required, the Reserve Bank plans to keep the value of the new notes below $200 million or 4% of the total deposits held by banks. But for opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai, the introduction of the new currency obligation will force people to turn to the black market to illegally acquire US dollars for imports.
The majority of the people who have to go out and find their wares cannot use the bond. And it means that our people will become even poorer and poorer and poorer. There is no economy which is run on the basis of a paper which has no financial value.
Previously, Zimbabweans used, in addition to the US dollar, a number of other currencies such as the South African rand, the country's main trading partner, and the Chinese yuan. According to economists, the shortage of the foreign currency is due to the balance of trade deficit in the first quarter of this year. In the meantime, Zimbabwe's central bank has imposed a daily withdrawal limit of $1,000 in an effort to curb dollar shortage.
Britain's mobile phone giant Vodafone this week announced that its underlying trade has grown for the first time in nearly a decade. Its business is booming in Europe, but its real growth is emerging from Asia, the Middle East and Africa, where bundle offerings and data take-up have boosted the firm's earnings. So it may come as some surprise that the firm's South African subsidiary Vodacom is dropping M-Pesa, its mobile money transfer and e-wallet service. The platform has had almost unrivaled success in many major African markets, but the firm's decided to shut up shop in the face of fierce competition for the so-called unbanked population. Kenneth Karuri and Guy Rodriguez-Lue have more.
Vodacom is discontinuing its M-Pesa mobile money service in South Africa, with effect from 30th June 2016, following a review of the service viability. The decision, Vodacom said, was made owing to the service failing to attract a large number of users, which made it unsustainable to continue operating. Vodacom says the high levels of financial inclusion in South Africa diminish the chances for M-Pesa success. Shamil Joseph, Vodacom Chief Executive Officer, expanded on the decision to withdraw the product, which is currently available at more than 15,000 outlets countrywide. Based on our revised projections and high levels of financial inclusion in South Africa, there is little prospect of the M-Pesa product achieving this in its current format in the midterm. Vodacom notes that in other markets, where financial inclusion is limited and where there is a more supportive macro environment, M-Pesa continues to gain solid traction based on exponential growth in customer acquisition. The company says Kenya and Tanzania are prime examples of these, adding that the decision does not affect M-Pesa customers in Tanzania, Lesotho, Mozambique and the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the product continues to grow exponentially. Vodafone recently announced M-Pesa had 25 million active customers with presence in Africa, Asia and Europe, boosted by market launches in Albania and Ghana. It further announced it had a network of more than 261,000 agents in 11 M-Pesa countries. South Africa was one of the first markets after Kenya where the technology was to be replicated. Initial efforts failed to pay off, which saw Vodacom, a subsidiary of Vodafone, revamp and relaunch the service in 2014.
Cameroonians don't drink a lot of coffee according to official statistics, but the country does claim to make some of the world's best. To increase consumption and boost sales, coffee growers now want the government to introduce regular coffee hours for civil servants. That's one of many ideas the industry has promoted during this year's International Festival of Cameroonian Coffee. Jean-David Mihamle and Elvis Bow have this report.
Every year, coffee players in Cameroon congregate at the annual coffee exhibition with the objective of unveiling the country's know-how in the production and processing of the product.
This coffee is coffee from the Northwest Province, and it's called Arabica coffee. And this is 100% Arabica from the highlands. Coffee grown in between kola nut trees.
But as coffee production in Cameroon reduces, farmers have been laying emphasis on quality and originality.
This coffee is good for the family. It is grown in the Mongo, precisely at Konsamba around mountains. Meanwhile, here we produce Arabica, Robusta and Lonanko Gold, which is found mainly in the Mongo.
After visiting the stands, the public appreciates the impact of the festival on the quality of coffee in Cameroon.
Un très bon café, c'est mélangé avec l'Arabica et Vital.
This is good coffee. There's a mixture of Arabica, Vita and Robusta. It has a very good taste.
Of course. This coffee is more than Starbucks in the US. It's a very, very tasteful. Let me use that word. So good. That's why I took time off to come and take a taste of it.
The Northwest, West and Littoral regions are the highest coffee production regions in Cameroon. Although production keeps reducing, farmers have been struggling to conquer the local market before going international.
That's all for this edition of Business Africa. Please let us know via social media if our business is good for you. And don't forget, there's always more on Africanews.com. Thanks for joining us and see you next week.